Last year while I was in Japan, I had the opportunity to sit down with Atsushi Ito, better known as Ito-san from Weld. For over several hours, we spoke about the history of the company, the cars, the drivers, and some of the projects that helped establish Weld as one of the most recognized names in Japanese drifting. Like many enthusiasts, I'd known the famous cars for years, the Acti Silvia, the Hyakushiki Mark II, and the D1 GP machines. But after speaking with Ito-san, I realized there was much more to the story, because Weld was never simply a tuning shop. It was a company built around creativity. A company that repeatedly asked one question: what can we build that nobody has built before? And over the last 25 years, that mindset's produced some of the most memorable cars in Japanese car culture. This is the story of Weld. Before Weld existed, Ito-san was already fascinated by cars. Like many enthusiasts during the 80s and 90s, his first exposure to drifting happened on the street. Drifting around Hakone and watching local drivers, he became hooked. But there was something he couldn't ignore. Most drift cars looked rough, covered in dust and dirt, built purely around function. At the same time, Ito-san, heavily influenced by American car culture, polished engine bays, perfect presentation, cars that looked just as impressive parked as they did on track. And he began asking a simple question: why can't a drift car be both? In 2000, Weld officially opened its doors. What started as a small workshop in Yokohama quickly developed a reputation for doing things differently. Ito-san wasn't interested in building ordinary cars. He wanted to build cars people would remember, and before long, Weld would create one of the most iconic drift cars of the early 2000s. Even today, more than 20 years later, it remains one of the most recognized drift cars ever built. The project was a collaboration between Weld and aero parts manufacturer Grace. Grace was founded by a former employee of Vertex, who had gone on to establish his own brand. Together, they set out to create something completely different, and they succeeded. The Acti Sylvia wasn't built around convenience, it wasn't built around regulations, it wasn't even built around practicality, it was built around possibility. The SR20 engine was moved approximately 45 centimeters rearward and the gearbox was relocated. The firewall had to be completely redesigned, a rear-mounted cooling system was developed, and a flat-mounted intercooler arrangement improved cooling efficiency while shortening pipe lengths. Custom fabrication could be found everywhere, even the windscreen opened. Every decision was made in pursuit of a better balance, with the goal of approaching a 50-50 weight distribution. Looking at the car today, it's impossible to miss the influence of American motorsport. Sparco seats, autometer gauges, polished aluminium, drag racing inspired presentation. Ito-san told me he spent countless hours polishing components. It's a detail you'll notice throughout many of the Weld builds. He believes if you're going to build something special, every detail should reflect that. Although many people remember the Acti Silvia as a showpiece, it was far more capable than most realise. Featured in many Japanese drift magazines, the car also appeared at Tsukuba Circuit for Time Attack. Tarzan Yamada drove it at Button Willow in America, and Ito-san still remembers the car running close to a 1-minute lap at Tsukuba. It wasn't just a display car, it worked. The Acti Silvia became a magazine star, featured in Drift Tengoku and Modified Magazine, just to name a few, and appearing at SEMA in the United States. By the mid-2000s, it had become one of the most recognizable drift cars on the planet. Eventually, the car remained in America. Through various owners, shops, and events, it continued a completely different life overseas. One former owner described it as an incredibly difficult car to maintain, a complicated machine packed with unique engineering and one-off fabrication, which honestly is exactly what you'd expect. The Acti Sylvia was never built to be easy, it was built to push boundaries, and despite spending decades away from Japan, it continued to inspire builders all over the world. But like many iconic drift cars, its story didn't end there. The car would eventually pass through several owners. Along the way, it slowly lost the identity that had made it so special. The SR20 was removed. In its place came a Dodge Viper V10. The Grace Aero disappeared, the work wheels were replaced. Piece by piece, the car became something entirely different. Eventually, the original Weld creation was gone. For many enthusiasts, it marked a bittersweet ending to one of the most beautiful drift cars of its era. When I asked Ito-san what is the most cherished memory throughout his entire career, his answer wasn't a D1 car, it wasn't a championship, it was the Acti Sylvia. As Weld continued to push the boundaries of what a drift car could be, Ito-san began another project on his own. He called it Xanthic. Rather than another tuning company, Xanthic became a creative extension of Weld, a place where new materials, new ideas could take shape. Xanthic made silver carbon its signature, later expanding into other coloured weaves that immediately stood apart. The inspiration came from the American sports compact scene, cars built as much for the show as they were for the street. It was exactly the philosophy Ito-san had admired for years earlier. Rather than copying it, he brought the ideas to Japan. Soon, Xanthic appeared across Weld's most iconic build. Not as a decoration, but as another expression of belief that a drift car could be both functional and beautiful. The philosophy would soon find its way onto the biggest stage in Japanese drifting, the D1 Grand Prix. If the Acti Silvia established Weld's reputation, the Hyakushiki JZX100 established Weld within D1. Around this time, Ito-san met a local driver named Yoichiro Takahashi, better known as Yubo. Ito-san first met him while performing maintenance on his Cresta. Yubo was a member of Nightwalkers and immediately stood out as someone with enormous potential. As Weld became more involved with drifting, relationships developed with drivers and builders throughout Kanagawa. Figures like Hirota Kuniaki, who would later establish Kunis, and Ueno-san from Vertex. The scene was small, everyone knew each other, and Weld was right in the middle of it. When Yubo received his D1 license, Ito-san offered him the opportunity to drive Weld's first D1 machine, the Hyakushiki JZX100 Mark II. Just like the Acti Sylvia before it, subtlety wasn't part of the plan. Despite being built as a dedicated competition car, Weld treated the JZX100 with the same attention to detail as every other project. The engine bay was meticulously finished. A custom gauge pod sat proudly on top of the dashboard, every detail had a purpose. Outside, the car wore a full Vertex body kit, complemented by work Ixa wheels, a wheel partnership that stretched back to the beginning of Weld. The result was a race car that looked just at home under the lights of Tokyo Auto Salon as it did at the D1 GP circuit. The car constantly evolved. The original version featured a simpler two-dimensional livery before transitioning into the famous three-dimensional design many enthusiasts remember today. Working alongside Art Factory graphics, Weld created one of the most recognizable liveries of the D1 era. The car became a fixture of magazine covers, events, and promotional material. An Aoshima model kit followed, and then came one of the most unexpected appearances. The Hyakushiki became the cover car of the Need for Speed J, a Japanese exclusive PlayStation 2 release in 2004. For an entire generation of enthusiasts, this became their exposure to Weld. Unlike many famous D1 cars, the original Hyakushiki still survives. Today it belongs to Rahman Rasel from Buy Now Japan. Remarkably, much of the car remains intact. The iconic dashboard-mounted gauge pod is still there, a small detail, but one that instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with the car. The original reverse opening bonnet and V-mount cooling system have since been removed in favor of the more conventional setup. But the car remains unmistakably Hyakushiki, a surviving piece of D1 history. While Weld was becoming known for D1 and competition drifting, some of the company's most impressive work was happening away from the spotlight. In 2006, Weld completed one of the most remarkable projects in its history, a JZX100 Cresta built for Yoshi Shinya. Before his accident, Shinya-san spent a lot of his time riding a Honda NSR 250 through the roads surrounding Mount Akagi. But following a serious accident, he was left paralysed. For many people, that would be the end of motorsport. For Shinya-san, it became the beginning of something new. He approached Weld with a vision: build a drift car that could be operated entirely by hand, engineering the impossible, and true to form, Weld embraced the challenge. The accelerator was controlled through a ring mounted behind the steering wheel. A brake system was relocated, operated through a custom linkage mechanism. A complex sensor and motor system handled clutch operation. Additional hydraulic systems allowed drifting techniques such as clutch kicks. This wasn't simply a mobility conversion, it was a purpose-built drift car, and because it was Weld, they didn't stop there. The exterior featured a candy red paint, dragon graphics by Art Factory, a red carbon bonnet from Xanthic, Vertex Aero and Workomotion XT9 wheels. Inside, a one-off 16-point roll cage was designed specifically around the driver's requirements, including space for a wheelchair. The completed car debuted at Tokyo Auto Salon in January 2007. Nearly 20 years later, it remains one of the most innovative cars Weld ever created. The car survived largely unchanged for almost 2 decades. Most recently, it was acquired by Yubo. The hand control system has since been removed, the vehicle refreshed, tested, and eventually sent to the United States for its next chapter of drifting. Its purpose may have changed, but its significance hasn't. One of the most surprising things I learned while researching Weld was just how much existed beyond the cars themselves. During the 2000s, Weld produced a wide range of products. Switch panels, interior accessories, fabricated components, engine dress-up parts, merchandise, everything. Many of these items have since become highly sought after among enthusiasts chasing period-correct builds. But perhaps the strangest Weld product wasn't a car part at all. At one point, Weld partnered with credit card company to create an official Weld members card, an actual branded credit card. It's one of those ideas that sounds completely ridiculous today, but it perfectly captures the influence Weld had during the peak of the D1 era. Weld wasn't just a tuning shop, it had become a lifestyle brand. In 2011, Ito launched Overdose. The name came from the idea of becoming addicted, doing too much, and going too far, which is probably the perfect description of Weld itself. While many people view Overdose as a separate from Weld, they're really chapters of the same story. Both revolve around drifting, and both revolve around innovation, and both revolve around building things differently. What began with real drift cars evolved into RC drifting. Overdose developed chassis, parts, accessories, and eventually became one of the most respected names in RC drifting globally. Today, Overdose products can be found throughout Asia, Europe, and North America. Ironically, Weld now spends almost as much time around RC drifting as full-size drift cars. Walking through Weld today, one thing becomes immediately obvious. The spirit hasn't changed. Drivers may have changed, technology may have changed, but the philosophy remains exactly the same. Drivers such as Yubo, Yamashita, and current driver Ryo continue carrying the Weld name into modern drifting. Customer cars continue filling the workshop, and Ito-san continues creating things nobody else would think to build. Looking back over 25 years of Weld history, it's easy to focus on the famous cars. But after speaking with Ito-san, I think the real story is much simpler: creativity. Because every important Weld project began with the same question: what if we did things differently? And 25 years later, that mindset is still inspiring enthusiasts around the world. Thank you so much for watching. Being able to travel to Japan, meet the people behind these incredible cars, and help preserve their stories is something I'm genuinely grateful for. If you'd like to see more documentaries like this, subscribing to the channel is the best way to support what I do. There are plenty more deep dives into Japan's tuning history already in the works. Until next time, thanks for watching.